Unfortunately, it's not just the media, it is the entire Democrat Party has made their pitch to voters across the country that Donald Trump poses an existential threat to democracy, that he is a fascist, and that they compare him to Hitler. I mean, these are despicable statements that the American people have been consuming for years. And so many mentally perturbed individuals are led to believe these words are truth and then are inspired to act on it.
So that's the White House's message to the country and the world today, to blame the quote, left-wing cult of hatred for the attempted shooting at Saturday's White House Correspondents' Dinner. Michael, John, and Claire are still here. Not for nothing. And I think in these moments, people say things. For Caroline, that's pretty consistent with a lot of her messaging. But not for nothing. This is J.D. Vance's record on some of those very attacks. Quote, Democratic Georgia State Representative Josh McLaurin, J.D. Vance's old college roommate, tweeted what he said was a message he received from J.D. Vance, who expressed concern that Trump might be, quote, America's Hitler. Heilemann, this is a genuine security concern and an absolute muddled mess of a message coming out of the administration.
Well, right. I mean, look, to start with something that Claire said a second ago about the ballroom. You know, we have seen many times, Nicole, on when there have been incidents of violence or near violence. We've seen, I don't want to both sides it, but you've seen the various contestants in the debate over gun rights try to pivot off those things, I think, legitimately. And make arguments for what they believe about either the need to control guns or the need to maintain Second Amendment rights. Now we have a White House where, in the moment of where they've decided to seize on this event to score political points and to try to achieve something that is what the president wants to achieve, it's not about something like the Second Amendment or gun control, something that has something to do with real policy. It's about trying to get the president's ballroom built. And the argument that the ballroom is the solution to this is ludicrous on its face. The notion that the press, the White House Correspondents' Dinner, again, not a dinner that I'm a giant fan of, but that is meant to and has traditionally celebrated the role of the press and the sanctity of the First Amendment, that you would have that event at the White House on the home field of any president, not just Donald Trump, but any president, the White House in the future, that's the press would go to the White House to have that event, is just kind of beyond ludicrous, and it suggests a total misunderstanding about what the event is meant to be for. And I think I said before, I maintain this almost an absolutist line. I have no time for anybody who says anything that contributes to that appeals to political violence, encourages it in a direct way or an indirect way. But I also agree entirely with what Claire said, that the primary driver of our current political moment, which has, again, too much political violence and too much acceptance of it, and too much talk about it on both sides, but the primary driver of it and the person who's normalized it has been this president. And so when you hear Caroline Leavitt making the argument she's making, that essentially, even though these people on the right are supposedly great paladins of free speech now, well, we love free speech and we hate when the woke mob tries to stop us from speaking our minds. And God knows President Trump can say whatever he wants, including all the things that Claire was referring to earlier and that we talk about all the time that have debased and coarsened the political culture and the political dialogue to the extent they have. He can say all those things, but if anybody actually on the Democratic side makes the arguments that they're making, including the one that J.D. Vance himself made, comparing Donald Trump to Hitler, that is now supposedly verboten. It is comical, ludicrous, and hypocritical, all rolled into one. I think that's what you meant when you asked the question about there having a muddled message. I think it's worse than muddled. I think it's the things I just said.
So this quote was uttered, Michael Feinberg, "We pledge to you that we will root out the communist, Marxist, fascist, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country, that lie and steal and cheat on elections. The radical left person that said that was Donald J. Trump. I think of Shaye Moss, Ruby Freeman, Jocelyn Benson, people for whom those threats and the attacks about lying and stealing in our elections have a impact on them not being safe in their homes. Go ahead, give me a name, give me a name. Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. The radical leftist that said that also named Donald J. Trump. A lot of extremists carried out acts of heinous violence against the blue. It was interesting to me that Kash Patel talked at length about law enforcement who we revere, but we revere them regardless of whether or not they're protecting the Capitol on January 6th or the president at the Correspondents' Dinner. Quote, "You'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength and you have to be strong." Donald Trump addressed his own supporters who would go on to defecate inside Nancy Pelosi's office and carry out those acts of violence against law enforcement officers on January 6th. Quote, "And we'll stand up to crazy Nancy Pelosi, who ruined San Francisco. How's her husband doing, by the way? Anybody know? And she's against building a wall on our border, even though she has a wall around her house, which obviously didn't do a very good job." That was radical leftist Donald J. Trump in September of 2023, after Nancy Pelosi's husband had been beaten with a hammer. So if we're going to have the conversation, you should just be honest about where we are.
Yeah, look, I realize there is sort of a performative kabuki dance atmosphere to these conversations after an act of political violence or attempted political violence, where we have to say that it is an equal plague on both of our houses, and the left and the right do it. But we should also be honest about something. While there are people who utter lunacies in both parties and who are extremists in both parties, in general, of late, the Democratic Party has generally tried to muzzle and or ostracize those within its ranks who truly go off the reservation. The Republican Party, on the other hand, looks at the people who make the most extreme and violent-inducing statements and elevates them to the White House and the Naval Observatory. There are absolutely people espousing violence on both the left and the right, but the way that those respective movements deal with the violence is markedly different. If you want an example, I haven't seen anybody on the left celebrate what happened the other night. But in the aftermath of Nancy Pelosi's husband getting beaten within an inch of his life by having a ball-peen hammer repeatedly smashed into his skull, Glenn Youngkin, the governor of Virginia, was cracking jokes. Donald Trump was posting on Truth Social making light of it. People who we have been told we are not allowed to criticize now because they themselves were killed were making light of it. There are people promoting violence on both sides, but there is only one side where the majority of the movement actively celebrates those people.